10 years ago, the Great Barrier Reef, the largest barrier reef in the world, one of the 8 wonders of the world, bleached. Like 93% of it bleached. And then the year after, it bleached again. And then it's bleached a number of times after that. Some of it recouping. Other times, other places did not recoup as much. And so we're continuing to see that degradation of the Great Barrier Reef. How do you solve that problem? You need more monitoring. You need more data to help managers understand the reef more, understand where the most vulnerable pieces are, and how you get that. How do you get that data? Like, you got to remember that the Great Barrier Reef is the size of the U.S. coast, the West Coast. So if you go from the top of the border at Canada and the top of the border at Mexico, that's the entire coastline. That's the entire size, the length of the Great Barrier Reef. How do you get all that data? Well, you use, these days with technology, you use citizen science and you use AI. And we're going to talk about that on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast, because we have the founding CEO of Citizens of the Reef, Andy Ridley, who is here to talk about his organization and what they've done to combine AI and citizen scientists to be able to create this huge database of data and be able to do what people haven't been able to do in a while, and is provide data for management models that are really helping out. We're going to talk about that on today's episode. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And action is what we're going to be talking about today, because Andy Ridley is here today. He is the founding CEO of Citizens of the Reef, and he's here to talk about what he took when he first heard about the barrier reef, the Great Barrier Reef bleaching 10 years ago, took that sort of down moment and said, I'm going to turn it into something positive. I'm going to turn it into something optimistic. He was a serial entrepreneur before that. He came back to Australia, where he's from the Netherlands, and was like, I want to do something good for the Barrier Reef. Came up with Citizens of the Reef with a couple of other mates. And look at that, I'm already talking Australian. I'm saying mates, never mind. But I'm really impressed with what him and his group were able to accomplish and have been able to accomplish using AI and citizen scientists. This is something where, like, just imagine you want to do something for the ocean, and you can do it from your own home, wherever you are in the world, and just look at an image and categorize reefs into 3 categories, right? One of the 3 categories, or maybe multiple categories, using AI. So it basically takes a snapshot. Like, people take pictures of the reef, that gets sent to you, it comes up on your phone, and you just kind of look at it and you say, okay, look at this outline that the AI did. Is that a branching coral, a boulder coral, or whatever? And then you just click and you confirm it. And then 5 other people get to see the same image, and they click and confirm it, right? So 5 people total, they get to click and confirm it. That's pretty incredible that you can do it. And you can just do that within minutes. Imagine doom scrolling for 3 hours on TikTok and you're like, where'd the time go? But imagine you did that for like 5 to 10 minutes, looking at a series of photos to be able to say, hey, yeah, like this is this type of coral. This is this type of coral. This is this type of coral. And then you're helping the Great Barrier Reef recover and be able to be managed even better than it is now, and hopefully stop from being bleached or stop from dying off that we're seeing each and every year. Just imagine that. Imagine taking something from your own living room, or from your bathroom, or from your walk, or from your commute, and you're just on your phone and you're helping the Great Barrier Reef, and you're staring at images of the ocean. So you're connecting with the ocean halfway across the world, or maybe you're on the coastline, or wherever you are in the world. I think it's an amazing thing. I want you to hear this interview because he's so inspiring for the work that he's been able to do. Such a creative genius in my opinion. And I just love for you to hear this interview. So here's the interview with Andy Ridley. He is the founding CEO of Citizens of the Reef. Enjoy the interview, and I will talk to you after. Hey, Andy, welcome to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about corals and conservation?
Oh, hey, Andrew. Really nice to see you. And yeah, definitely.
All right. I'm looking forward to this. This has been, I know it's been on the docket for a while. We've planned this interview, and I've been doing a lot of research. It's been a lot of fun to dive in to Citizens of the Reef, which is your organization, which you're the founding CEO. And so I'm looking forward to talking just about corals and conservation, and where we're at with conservation, and why you decided to put your 2 feet in and say, hey, look, we need to help corals. We need to help them. We're going to talk about AI. We're going to talk about citizen science and how AI has improved citizen science. We're going to talk a lot about the work you've done, some of the successes, some of the challenges that you're facing, and we're just going to get into all sorts of things. But before we do, Andy, why don't you just let the audience know who you are and what you do?
I am Andy. I live in Cairns in northern Australia. So just a few kilometres to my left is the Great Barrier Reef,
Beautiful.
and we're based up here in Cairns. The Great Barrier Reef is very big. If I'll give you a kind of an idea. If you put the Great Barrier Reef up alongside um, the USA, it would go from above the border with Canada to below the border with Mexico. So
Insane.
it's very
Insane.
bad. And we're sort of about the third from the top is
Okay.
where we're based. Yeah, and we started Citizens 8 years ago, and it was off the back of, I know your listeners will know all about this, but we had these two very, very serious sequential bleachings on the Great
Right.
Barrier Reef back in 2016, 2017. And I think everyone kind of went into a state of shock to see what had happened and what was happening. I think the message that went around the world was the Great Barrier Reef had died. It hadn't
Yeah.
died, but it was incredibly serious.
It was like
And
90
so we,
some odd percent, right? That bleached, I think is what it was. I think that was
well,
the headline.
yes, it's sort of spotted. So in the northern end, there was really, really significant bleaching. And as
Mm,
you know, with bleaching, you get mortality if it's there for a long while. If
yeah.
the water remains hot and it's kind of doldrums kind of weather conditions, you'll start to get high mortality of the coral. But some parts of it did come back.
Yeah.
I think on the top of the reefs, like the reef flat, you got a very, very high levels of mortality of coral. But anyway, there was a sort of an emergency conference held in Townsville, which is a city about 4 hours south of Cairns, held by the Marine Park Authority. Some of the top scientists were there,
Yeah.
tourism, everybody was there. And it was kind of like this almost a palpable sense of panic in
Yeah.
that room. And it was basically, the question was, well, what are we going to do about it? And one of the things that came out of that was we need much bigger data, much more information on what's going on across the whole of the system.
Hmm.
And actually, same thing across all of tropical reefs around the world. And that's kind of where Citizens sort of started. Well, how would we do that, knowing that we'll never have $1 billion to build a research flotilla? How do we do that with, you know, the smell of an oily rag, which is kind of all we had? And that's
Well,
kind of where Citizens started.
well, this is incredible because to be inspired so much by such a disaster, like such a pessimistic thing that's happened, right? When you see the Great Barrier Reef, which is like one of the wonders of the world, it's gorgeous. People travel there, just to see it, on a regular basis from all over the world, and then it bleaches like the whole thing, especially in the north where it's even more remote, you could argue, and you're just like, what's going on here? Like, how do we do this?
Mm.
Now, let me put me in a situation like, what were you feeling at that point? Like, what were you doing before this started? Were
Mm.
you still involved in environmental things, or because like, what made you go, boom, no, we need to start something. We need to do something about this.
Yeah, I mean, it really was driven by the event for me. I was actually working in Amsterdam on circular economy. So I was running a circular economy organization called Circular Economy, and
Right.
I'd previously worked on. I'd started a project called Earth Hour, which is the sort of lights out in cities all
Yep.
over the world. That
Yep.
campaign. So I've been working in environment centering for a long while, but me personally, passionately love diving. I love the Great Barrier Reef. It's one of my favorite places on the planet, maybe even most favorite place on the planet. So I
Yeah.
was in Amsterdam when the first of those big bleachings happened, and
Mm,
I'm 54 now. When this happened, I'd have been 44 or something. But
yeah.
my team that worked with me, I had about 30 people in that team, and they're all much younger than me. And you could see the shock on their faces. These are like
Mm,
essentially 20-year-old, 30-year-olds in Amsterdam from all over the world, all working on circular economy stuff. But the idea that the Great Barrier Reef had died, which is what it said on Twitter, right?
yeah.
Was you could just see how emotionally it was affecting people. People were just like stunned, Imagine this
Yeah.
extraordinary place. Now, thankfully, that wasn't totally the case. A lot of it survived. Um, but some friends of mine were working on a project back in Australia, which was, around, how do you engage people in conservation on the Great Barrier Reef? And they were asking my advice on it, and I was being really irritating and offering lots of advice. And they eventually went, "Oh, why don't you come and start this thing up?" So that's kind of how I kind of got
Oh,
back to
wow. Okay.
Australia, got the thing, got rolling, and then within a couple of weeks of being back in Australia, the second of the bleachings happened.
Right. Right.
And I remember being out on the reef. I was out on Moore Reef, about 60 k's off, 60 kilometers off Cairns offshore, so right on the outer reef here. And you can literally see the soft coral kind of peeling
Jesus.
off the bedrock, and you're like, it was probably one of the most horrific,
Yeah.
alarming. It's just, and it smelt of death. It was shocking. Now that
Even on the
reef
water, it
now,
smelt. Even on the
oh,
water, it smelled.
totally,
Ugh.
entirely, Andrew.
Wow.
And there was a lot of kind of denial about it. Like a lot of people sort of like, we can't talk about it because it's tourism, and they're all kind of fair arguments. People have their livelihoods built on
Of
this,
course.
amazing place. But I think that what that did for us and with the Citizens Project was going, well, how, like, we're all talking about it. You could sign 100 petitions and not make a difference. What are we going to do here right now at a very practical level? And that,
Hmm.
as I was saying, there's that conference was held in Townsville, and one of the biggest things that came out of it is there's just not enough information about what's going on, particularly
Yeah.
given it's such a large area, same size as Germany or Japan, talking massive areas. So we thought, right,
Huge.
well,
Yeah.
we brought some of that crowd economy, shared economy, Earth Hour lessons, and all of that into it, and started to build this kind of motley flotilla of boats that turned into, I guess, one of the biggest research flotillas in around, and it's all run by locals, and whether it be traditional owner rangers or tourism vessels or dive boats or even the odd super yacht if we get lucky. And that's how we kind of started the thing.
So you were right off the bat. I know that's in the name, Citizens of the Reef, right? That's a big part of it, where it's like,
Yeah.
let's bring everybody together and let's try and solve this like together. Let's just figure out we need more data. We need more monitoring. We need information, as you mentioned before, right? Those were the big
Mm.
conclusions that came out. It's such a large place. You need to cover a lot of grounds. How did you build that? Did you build that community quickly? Where you had this flotilla of boats and stuff
Yeah.
like, and how did that start?
That's a really good question. So the answer is kind of yes and no. The no bit is even after that meeting in Townsville, um, we knew that we almost sort of turned into a brief. How would you get broad scale reconnaissance from across such a large area when you haven't got enough money?
Yeah.
And why were you doing that? So a really big part of this is actually what you're really trying to do is trying to build a targeting system. So with
Hmm.
minimal resources, where do you put them? And that's a question on the Great Barrier Reef, but it's also a question for tropical reefs everywhere. In fact, it's kind of a question for conservation terrestrially or in the marine environment. And I guess the other part of it was you never have enough assets, you never have enough money, et cetera, et cetera. So what resources do you have? And on the Great Barrier Reef, when we first arrived here, what it felt like was you'd have skippers on boats or dive instructors who knew their reefs really well,
Yeah.
but were not really involved in any meaningful way in conservation. And yet they have all these years, and have a skipper who's been working the reef for 30 years. They'll know more about the reef than any researcher, right?
Yeah. And they make
Sorry, well,
money
how do
off the
we?
tourism and fishing or whatever
Correct.
that might be,
Yeah,
right?
it's their
Yeah.
livelihoods, and they
Yeah.
generally passionately love the
Yeah.
place that they work, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't have stayed there for so long. So that sort of start to get those ingredients of how to do it. But to be really honest with citizens, the first 3 years, it was like a startup. It was we
Yeah.
didn't have enough focus. We were struggling with how to do stuff. The technology wasn't good enough. You started from scratch, trying to think through a new problem, because essentially
Hmm.
it felt like a new problem. Um, and uh, we took 2 years at least to try and work out how to come up with even like the basic idea. And then we started to pilot it. Then COVID hit. And COVID was weird. If you were in Melbourne or Sydney, it was a pretty terrible time in Australia. I think Melbourne was the city with the longest lockdown. But up
Right.
here in Cairns, what happened? Cairns is a tourist town, but what happened in Cairns is no one came to visit. But you still had all the tourist boats. You still had all the people. We had a thing in Australia called JobKeeper, which is where people got paid, even though it was just trying to essentially keep everyone eating and paying their rent. And
Right.
so you had all these people who work in the industry, the marine industry up here. You had all these boats that still have to run their engines. And so that was the first 2020 was COVID year, and we just managed to get the first of our motley flotilla out there and started to capture photographs. It was sort of weirdly. a bit like kind of a Dunkirk moment, all the small boats going out to help. It was kind of, yeah, it's an interesting thing to see. And what you realize more and more, the more and more I work in this, is that people who live on those reefs love them passionately.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, a lot of them have got skin in the game in terms of their jobs and their livelihood, but there is a deep love for this place.
Well, and think about the challenges too, right? You have this tragedy of bleaching in the largest coral reef barrier reef in the world.
Yeah.
You're trying to, you get inspired. You're like, okay, you move from the Netherlands to back to Australia with the family and everything, and saying, all right, like we're here to help solve this problem. We'll do what we can, monitoring. That's the thing. And then you go out, you try and get a bunch of people to go out. You have some passionate people who want to help out, and then a global pandemic hits, like
Yeah.
where everybody's got to stay inside. Especially Australia, you guys struggled like just like we did, where mandating, continuing, going back into isolation, right, because of government protocols and so forth. The challenges just keep building and building and building. How do you fight that when you want to do something so good, yet outside factors that you cannot control cause you to have, like, was that a big setback for you in terms of getting the
No,
amount of people out, or?
it was weird because it's obviously a circumstance that none of us had ever, like, no one had
No,
seen this
nobody,
before, right?
right?
And and so at one point, I was being, I have a board, and I was under orders by the board to work out how to shut down the organization because there was
Wow.
a kind of view at one point where
Wow.
like, you're going to run out of money, there's no tourists
Yeah.
here, how are you going to make it work? But actually, I think I did put probably a week's worth of work into trying to work out how to do that. And you start to work out how you're paying people to off, and also it's a really crappy kind of experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about a week into this, it's like, why are we doing this? Like, what were we just giving up?
Right.
And
Can't
then
give
you
up on the
start
Great
to
Barrier Reef.
no, not really, but also I think it's a state of mind as well. As you
Yeah.
sometimes these things, like with for us, for as terrible as it was, if you're in Melbourne, in Cairns, we had like 6 weeks of lockdown,
Right. It
like
wasn't as
hardly
bad.
anything.
Gotcha.
No,
Gotcha. Yeah,
and
it was
even then you could
Melbourne that
still
kept
go out and
getting
walk
it,
a
right?
dog.
Yeah.
Yeah, and other big cities, but because Cairns is essentially a really remote city.
Right.
The nearest next out, like Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea is the nearest capital city to us, not
Wow.
Canberra or yeah.
Right.
So in a way, we just kind of lent into it and went, right, well, all these boats are here, all these people are here, people want something to do, and so we ran the first year, and it kind of worked, and it set a tone of everyone working together and collaboration and trying to help each other out, and no one was competing with each other at the time
Right.
because there's no kind of operators competing with each other because there was no tourists.
Right.
So kind of in a weird sort of way,
It
very
helped.
opportunistic maybe, it really helped. And
Yeah.
it proved you could do it. And often I think with anything that you do in life, if it's news, half the issues is dealing with the skepticism of it won't work. Right. So it actually gave us a bit of an opportunity, and yeah, it was quite. I think it came almost as a relief because everyone had a bit of a mission,
Yeah. And they had time. They could
and
spend some
everyone
more
had
time on
time.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you'd have people working in the dive industry who normally, if they go out on a dive boat, they're like chockers all day. I mean, you've been
Mm-hmm.
on dive boats, I'm sure, right? So, it's a 12-hour day. They're
It's
exhausted. They
tough.
don't really have that much. It's like, um, so you suddenly had all these people with all this experience being able to spend hours in the water doing stuff and
Oh yeah.
essentially get paid for it.
Yeah.
In a weird way, Andrew, it's like what the world should be like being able to have people spending time really
Yeah.
doing kind of cool stuff. That's what
Well,
in a perfect world, that's what we'd be doing, right?
yeah, it's almost like taking and then giving back, right? Like you're
Yeah,
taking, you're making money off the ocean, but you got to give back in the ocean. And obviously,
yeah,
this is nothing against like ecotourism and tourism, that the outfits that do it properly and take care of the reef while they're out there. But it's almost like they would, if they had the time to do that, it'd be ideal, right? Because then
yeah.
they can spend a lot of their time to take care of the reef just as much as they use it. In
But
terms
I
of for
guess we were
tourism
talking
and stuff.
a bit about this before we kind of pressed the record button. But it's this thing of kind of our world is pretty mixed up at the moment, where The first
Yeah.
thing, as we go through into these crazy times that we're in at the moment, the first thing to drop off is basically environment conservation. Like the money
Yeah.
just drops away almost immediately, and yet it's the place that we live, and it's there's a level of insanity to the fact that we're not investing the time and effort, and even the social capital into looking after the place that we live. But it
Yeah.
is how we live at the moment. It's pretty weird, but
Well, it's just, we're so disconnected, right? We're so
yeah,
disconnected from, like, a lot of us are disconnected from the ocean, just by geography, but it's also, in terms of thought process. I recorded and published an episode about a month ago about how we need to talk about the ocean more just in our regular conversations. So that,
yeah.
not
I
in a
listen to that.
pessimistic kind of way, but in a way that, hey, you know what? I like to use the ocean, or I like to be out on the ocean. Or the last time I was there, or, I'm there. If you're there every day, like you said, you're a few kilometers away, and I'm sure you're in the ocean quite a bit.
Yeah,
That's, you just have to talk about that fun time. People on the coast maybe take it for granted they get to talk about it all the time, but people like myself who live in central Canada, and you get to see the Great Lakes, but you don't get to see the ocean. We need to talk about more, even if it's a river or a lake or something. Talk about the health, talk, in an optimistic kind of way, and then I feel like we get more connected. It's more top of mind in terms of regular decisions that we use, in terms of, like, yeah, we always go over convenience over environment, I feel like, and we need to sort of get away from that.
when we started this project, the Great Reef Census Project, one of the things around it was, you, again, you often coming back to this thing of how much funding is that, and it's never enough, right? Um, and so you're starting to go, okay, well, what assets do we have that we don't have to pay for? So
Mm,
I've been talking about this kind of motley flotilla, which with all the tourism boats and all this, the tugs going out to service mooring lines and stuff like that. But there's also this asset of people, just general virtual volunteers. And one of the things that COVID really kind of accelerated was virtual volunteering, because everyone was stuck at home and they're still trying to get
yeah.
some sort of sense of connection. And
Yeah.
but which was again fortuitous for what we were trying to do, because suddenly we had a kind of workforce available. But it is also slightly, like, it's something that slightly it sort of irritates me a bit, but is that there is a default often, I think, in conservation and research to remove people and lean on technology, or whether you're talking about going out on the reef, there's a bit of a rites of passage to for a lot of people who live in the communities here, particularly traditional owners, actually, of spending time on sea country, being in the water and
Mm,
like living and breathing it.
yeah.
It's an amazing thing to have in your life. To
Yeah.
your point,
For sure.
but even with the virtual volunteering, it's like, I think one of the rules that we had at the beginning when we were trying to set this thing up was, okay, how do you not engineer people out of this? How do you actually engineer them in and do that?
Yeah.
And can you do that in a meaningful way? Can you do that in a way that isn't just kind of um, tokenistic or
Yeah.
marketing? And and I don't mean that in a critical way. I just mean, can you go to the next level, really? And so
Right.
that's one of the things with the project, with the census project. We're going, okay, if we're able to capture images from hundreds or even thousands of reefs across the Great Barrier Reef or across the world, what is the role of people in this? And
Mm,
that actually came to us as a kind of bit we had a bit of a crisis, because the census project started to work really well. And the first year we got like 14,000 images from about 140 reefs or something. But the second year we got to 300 reefs, and we had tens of thousands of images. And we were experts were doing the analysis, but they were
it takes
slow.
a lot of time.
It was a super boring job. So they
Yeah.
got kind of bored and didn't want to do it. And then you have to pay. And we didn't have enough money. So there's a bit of a theme there, if you notice, Andrew.
Yeah.
Uh, so, uh, so we worked with Dell, the tech company, and we were sort of looking at can we do this with AI? And on one hand, you immediately go, oh, maybe AI can do all the analysis of these images. In the images, you're basically looking for how much plate coral, boulder
Yeah.
coral, and branching coral there is. And if it's got a lot, then you might have a key source reef, or a mother reef, as the TO, the traditional owners call it. And so that's kind of what we were looking for, these most important of all the reefs within the system. But we tried AI. We got it to around 70% as accurate as an expert, which is good, but not
Pretty
good
good.
enough.
Yeah.
So then we sort of went for, can we add the AI with the human eye? And we built this hybrid system of both. And that's now, like, it takes about just under a minute to analyze an image. And it's as accurate as an expert within like 1 or 2 percentage points.
So how
So
does it work now? So now you have like you have a system that's 70% accurate just on its own, and then you
yeah,
have a person, that has a bit
yeah.
of an expertise or knowledge of corals. How does it work to make it even more accurate?
Yeah, so we had this imaginary person in our heads who was commuting to work in Jakarta, totally imaginary
Okay.
person,
Yeah.
and therefore had a lot of commute time, like 4 hours a day, and had a mobile phone and a smartphone, and therefore we wanted to be able to go, could this person commuting to in Jakarta every day analyze an image in 2 minutes on their
Hmm.
phone and do that once a day for 5 minutes? So
Yeah.
almost like stop the doom scrolling, do that for 5 minutes, right? So that was kind of our imaginary person. And so pretty much it's kind of what we built. We wanted it to be able to be used by somebody who's never been to the Great Barrier Reef or a reef. That need to be really simple. And we were looking for really simple stuff. When we first started the platform, we had like 164 options and it was kind of ridiculous. That was our scientists wanted. Oh, we need 164 categories, and of course,
Of
it
course.
didn't really work, right? So now we went, okay. Actually, what we really want to know was how much plate coral, boulder coral, and branching coral is there,
Yeah. Keep it simple.
and what else is in there? Yeah, exactly. So that's what we built, and we're sort of thinking about, well, so the AI will draw a shape. You
Hmm.
can look at this on gravysenses.org, but the AI will draw a shape around, will draw a line around a shape that's pretty good at picking out like boulder coral or branching or what. And then that image, you'll get asked if you go onto the site, you'll get asked, okay, what do you see? What's that boundary drawn around? What is it? Plate coral, boulder coral, or branching? And you got a little tutorial first, but it's like super easy. But we wanted to design the whole system so that you basically had to have no knowledge at all,
Yeah.
never have been to the Great Barrier Reef. You don't need to know about coral. It was really, really simple. And so then every image gets analyzed by five different people, and it's the power of the crowd. So if five people are basically saying the same thing, you know that it's a good chance it's plate coral. So there's a whole paper on this, which came out of University of Queensland, just looking at how accurate the data is, because people are incredibly skeptical about
Of
citizen
course.
science at the beginning. But actually, I think it's actually the mass disruption to conservation that's, I think, both required, but also is going to be is probably going to be facilitated by AI. The reality that you can
100%.
make a citizen anywhere valuable in a conservation role is quite a big breakthrough if we embrace it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm on the website now, so I keep looking over to the right, by the way, and I'm
Yeah,
looking
yeah, no,
at
you're good.
the video that you have. It's almost like a how-to guide, or like
Yeah,
just an initial guide in terms of like explaining how it's working. I don't have the sound on, of course, but I'm looking at it. You see like boulder branches, kind of plate
yeah, it's
corals, and then
super
you have this
simple, right?
purple line that goes around, and you just have to. All you have to do, I guess, is just click and agree, and like this is how you do it.
Yeah. Basically, you'll have
This,
a few options down the left-hand side, and it just goes, oh, yeah, that's plate. And even if you get
yeah.
it wrong, somebody else will get it right.
Yeah, you have
So it's
five. You have
basically,
the power of numbers, right? To be like,
yeah.
no, no, actually, that's I would consider that this. Yeah, I love this aspect. Have you gamified this a little bit to make it more
I,
enticing
I,
for people?
yeah, a little bit. So what we found was that, well, firstly, I'd say this, that school kids, sort of 9 to 16, are incredibly good at this. Like they're
Yeah,
like, I'm like an old, annoying, slow, uh, yeah, compared to like an 11-year-old who'll just be like, just firing through this stuff.
yeah,
They're just so quick. It's amazing. So,
yeah.
but I reckon that if we look at who's doing this, it's basically about a third is school kids currently, a third is corporate volunteers out of companies, and a third is just general public. So you've got, it basically works with a lot of different people. We've gamified it to the extent of like, for example, at the moment, if you go on there, I think it's only in Australia, but I think we have an international one coming out. If you every time you do 5 images, you win a ticket to basically a draw to come to the Great Barrier Reef and come out and look at some of the restoration sites we have out on the
Beautiful.
reef and stuff like that. But what you could, I mean, there is so much you could do to this in terms of gamification. I think it's still it's pretty cool platform, but it's still pretty rudimentary in comparison to what you could do to it.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, 100%. Like this is
yeah,
just the
right. So
beginning, I feel,
it's
right?
like Mark One, right? So
Yeah.
so, and I think the other part to that is at the moment we're just looking for those three types of coral. But actually, we've been doing some work with with Mars, we have a big restoration program called Reef Stars, and and what they look for is fields of rubble next to healthy coral. And you can put these kind of, they're called Mars reef stars. They basically stabilize the reef, and you can put coral fragments on them, and you can actually rebuild small areas of reef. Doing that's very effective kind of restoration on small scale. But we're now using the data that we capture from all these photographs that are coming in from across the Great Barrier Reef and other places, to find those areas. So you can start to see, okay, well, step one was find these three types of hard coral. Step two could be, fields of rubble and hard coral, and you can just keep doing more and more and more with this. I think the big challenge for us is not to design people out of it. I think it's a really critical
Yeah, you got to
part
keep them involved.
of conservation. Yeah.
Well, it's a great way to connect them too to the Great Barrier Reef. Like people all over the world, like you said, in Jakarta and here in Burlington, Ontario, where I live, or in the Arctic, even if they just have an app or they go on the website and they just like boom, 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 you do it, and you're like, this is what corals look like. This is what branching corals like. We hear it all the time. I
Yeah.
used to be a marine aquarium hobbyist, and I was like, this is really cool. I want to see these branching corals. I want to see what they look like in the wild.
Yeah.
I want to see what a reef is supposed to look like. And you don't always see that. You may see it in documentaries and so, but you're not really focused on that. Here, it's like something that's specifically focused on there. And also, like, it's a great opportunity for an education tool. You know what I mean? To like not only get through this stuff, but maybe like after like, you do 5 or 6, you get like a tidbit of information of like, this is what branching corals are important for. Like there's such an opportunity.
Yeah.
So many, as you mentioned, this is the first iteration. And you're just like, oh, okay, like there's a lot of opportunity here with how you can build this out. But the fact that you're getting people engaged, like how many people have been a part of this so far? Have you been able to figure out the count of like how many people have actually started doing
Yeah,
this analysis?
it's still relatively new. I think we have about 12,000 sort of what we call super users. So that's people who've done like a lot, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
And So it's still relatively small. But what we at the moment we're trying to build our virtual volunteering workforce up to about 60,000. If we had
Okay.
60,000 people spending kind of 5 minutes of their
Oh
time
my
doing
God.
this, we could basically do all the analysis of the Great Barrier Reef in just a few hours.
Yeah. Think
So
about
I
that.
think
Think about that.
that's crazy, right?
That's
Like we've got
insane.
12. I think we've got 12,000 something at the moment, right?
Yeah.
But at 60,000, if everyone just gave 5 minutes. So at the
Yeah.
moment we're concentrating on Great Barrier Reef, but in they've started to collect data in the Hawaiian Islands. So there'll be a version of this will be launched around World Oceans Day in Hawaii, and we're doing the same in the Red Sea. We're doing the same in the Coral Triangle. So you start to look at this. Where this gets really interesting, and I think quite exciting, is this idea of going, okay, we on the Great Barrier Reef, we've got lots of experience that we've learned here, but there is experience all over the world, often disconnected. There's
Mm-hmm.
basic stuff that we all need to understand and know, whether that be, what's going on between the different like reef, essentially reef connectivity, where if you've got limited resources, are you going to spend that resource,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be money or whether it be time or boat time or whatever, and what would you do on those reefs? And then what's working and what's not? Because that's one of the other big things in conservation is you'll find there are mimicking projects everywhere. Even you'll
Yeah.
find there'll be mimicking projects of ours, right?
Of
But
course.
how do you get to a situation where you go, okay, let's try and pool this. How do we open source all of this
Yeah.
and go, right, everyone's got to, essentially citizens, you've got rights and responsibilities. So you can use all of this stuff, but your responsibility is then to feedback what you learn.
Yeah.
And where you get a restoration technique, for example, or a stewardship sort of technique that's working really well, we want to know. Where it's not working really well, we also
Of
want to know,
course.
so we don't do it. Yeah.
Well,
So
it's a
yeah,
constant improvement, right? You're trying to improve the
yeah,
algorithms, you're trying to improve the AI, you're trying to improve people's interpretation of what they're seeing, and then maybe even build on that if you can, down the road. So
yeah.
the science is always going to be there. It's going to have to be there, right? To make sure that everything is accurate and whatnot, right?
Well, and I think as I said before, one of the great challenges with citizen science is because of where it's come from. It's still like a really early,
Yeah,
still quite a new topic almost.
for sure.
In a way, it is. Although you could sort of go back in history and go, well, actually, farmers have been scientists in their own land for years and
True.
years, or. So, uh,
Yeah.
but it's definitely looked down on by the research community, and and in some cases for good reason, I think. But
Yeah.
I think we're going into a very different age where it can become an incredibly useful tool to get
Oh,
massive
100%.
scale up into places. So we don't have to fly people all over the world to do stuff. You can actually do, real locally based
Yeah.
conservation. You sort of start to see those people as, you know, much more around the expertise can be transferred in a different way.
Yeah.
But so can the expertise on the reefs themselves come back and help other people all over the world. So I, in a perfect world, I sort of feel like there are massive opportunities here to really rethink in the same way that maybe Spotify changed the record industry, how you think about changing the conservation world and just bringing
Yeah.
far more resource to it. That resource is not being used at the moment. So
Agreed.
we
Agreed.
sort of look at screen time as a resource, right? So attention is almost like a currency.
Yes, it is.
And one of the great things about podcasts is one of those rare times where people actually will sit down. They probably won't have done with me nattering on, but
Oh no,
they'll
they
sit down and
are.
listen to a long form kind of type conversation. But
Yeah.
we have this thing in Australia. I think average Australian spends 3 hours and 15 minutes scrolling on their phone every day. And I'm guilty of that. My kids are definitely guilty of that, even more
Always.
than me.
Yeah.
But that's time that could be utilized. So we've got this kind of idea at the moment, which we're working on, and it's just like, cat meme, save the reef for 5 minutes, then cat meme. Just that kind of whole idea of like,
Yeah. Like take a
how do we
break from
capture?
doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do something good, stop the
Yeah.
doom scrolling. There's plenty of political reasons to stop doom scrolling at the moment. So.
Yeah, for sure. Well, everybody's mental health needs a little break, I think.
Oh, oh
And
my God.
to be able to stare at reef, like a
Yeah.
beautiful reef, and maybe sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad.
Sometimes it's
Revisit
not.
it.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
both.
sometimes you revisit it and see how it's doing, and has it recovered from a bleaching event, or is it going through a bleaching event, or sometimes you never know. How are the photographs taken?
It's really simple. So if you take an average reef, you're trying to get all four sides of a reef. So the wild side, which normally in this case faces to the east,
Yep.
the lagoon side, which is the west side, and then the pressure points on either end. So it's a
Okay.
barrier reef, so that's kind of they're not so many fringing reefs here.
Gotcha.
And the pressure points, where you get the big animals on either end normally
Yeah.
up here. Um, and you have two people in the water, minimum of two people in the water, 40 photographs on a GoPro, about 2 to 3 meters away from the side of the reef. And you take a photograph every 5 kicks of your fins. And you take 40
Okay.
photographs. So you get 80 photographs across a survey. And then you upload into the system. And this is like a very easy system. One of the first challenges we had when we started this was actually wasn't that hard getting people to go out and take photographs. What was hard was getting the photographs off the GoPros. So we
Right.
built this whole system that made
Right.
basically in Australia, what happens is you go out on the reef and then you come back and go to the pub, and or maybe you go back to your family or something, but often pub in this case. But yeah, so you're sort of thinking, well, how do you get those? So we built a system where you basically come out of the water, you GoPro, and it immediately uploads. But
Like you put in a
yeah,
card somewhere and it uploads like from a
you
computer.
basically Bluetooth it. It's really easy.
Oh,
Yes,
cool.
super easy. Yeah.
So
So
essentially the way the system works, sorry to interrupt, but the way the system works is you have all these boats in the water from tourists, like tourist operations and so forth. They
yeah,
go in the
yeah,
water, they're in the water anyway. They have the
yeah,
GoPro. They're just there not only to make sure the tourists are having a good time, but also to make sure like to take these pictures
yeah.
every 5 kicks. You
But
could even also
exactly.
include like the odd tourists to be able to do it too, because they might feel, hey, this is a great way to look at the reef, a great way to help if you need to. But you have people in the water doing it with all these boats on the water, and then they come once they're done their trip or their day, they come in a series of photos, probably hundreds at that point, for an entire day out on the water, gets uploaded to the system, and then the system, basically distributes it out to the users to be able to make those go through the
Pretty
analysis. Right?
much. Pretty
That's
much
pretty
exactly
much
that.
the.
Yeah.
How long did it
I
take you
mean,
to get to that point, like where it's almost streamlined?
I think we're still streamlining. I think we're constantly
Yeah.
streamlining actually. But it's been iterative. It's been four or
Yeah.
5 years working on this. The first version was actually the first version. Again, we were dealing with a lot of skepticism around just even the approach. So that
Yeah.
was kind of interesting to deal because you're having to deal with a lot of negativity.
Of course.
But now I feel like we've gone quite a long way past that, and I think the results in the scientific papers are out from University of Queensland, all this kind of stuff. So it makes a big difference. but it is a very different way of thinking about how you get scale,
Hmm.
and the idea that you can get scale, which is challenging, without having, $1 billion.
Yeah.
So it has been iterative, but it accelerates every time you bring more talent into it. It basically helps it. And one of the interesting things, even the person who did the AI, the original set of AI, her name's Aruna. She currently works in Texas, but she was working in Sydney. And she was originally from India, had moved to Castle Hill in Sydney, had never been in the ocean. And yet
Wow.
she led the team that did the AI, which
Yeah.
was, I think, pretty groundbreaking. I think no one had done it before. And yeah, so we actually took her, and it was a kind of cool moment. We took her in the water she'd never been in the ocean. And one of my team, Yaz, took her into the ocean for the first time, and we were doing a doco for a streaming
Yeah.
platform here in Australia, and they filmed it. It's just like one of the coolest bits,
Oh, I
definitely
can
the best bit of the film.
imagine.
Yeah, her face just lights up because she
Oh,
was
of
on a really, it
course.
was on a really amazing reef called Flynn Reef, which is off Cairns, and
Okay.
with yeah, and it was yeah, it was kind of one of those
Probably life
special.
changing.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you see someone's eye, like, it's a bit of it's an amazing thing to go on the reef. You
Yeah,
see people's eyes light up in a way that, you know, you'd only see in the Serengeti or somewhere like that.
for
It's
sure.
very similar.
I love it. This is such a cool thing to do. And then now, when you get all that data, I mean, obviously that's been your focus. Is like, okay, let's get the data. Let's try and figure out. Let's get this analysis done. What do you do with the data after that? Like, do you have scientists in
Yeah.
house that analyze it, look at coverage, make up maps like in a GIS or something, or do you hand it over to the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park?
Yeah, great
It's a lot of
question.
data.
So
It's a
it's
lot
a
of
lot of
data,
data. It's a lot of data, and
right?
it's a new type of data because it's broad scale
Yeah,
reconnaissance. It's not sort of hyper like accurate quadrant kind of, here's what's
right.
happening in the square meter. It's more like seascape.
Hmm.
Um, but that was kind of what was asked for at the beginning. So the data goes into so this project's a partnership with the University of Queensland, the Marine Spatial Ecology Lab. There's a guy there
Yeah.
called Pete Mumby, Professor Pete
Pete
Mumby,
Mumby, just
who
not well known, I guess. I'm
he's
sarcastic. Guy's like world
he,
renowned.
yeah, he is a unusually, he was a big advocate for this from the beginning, and it's been kind of
Yeah,
one of he's helped start it basically. So it
yeah.
goes into his lab, and we
Hmm.
have and then that data is used for the modeling. So I think it's providing about 50% of the modeling data that
That's
then goes
awesome.
back to the Marine Park Authority, particularly to guide their crown of thorns starfish culling boats.
Yep,
So we have a an animal that's on the Great Barrier Reef. I'm sure you know, Sandra, but it's
yep.
called crown of
The-
thorns starfish. Yeah, it's an incredibly efficient eater of coral,
yes,
and I think is responsible currently for about 50% of the coral loss on the Great Barrier
yes,
Reef,
yeah.
soon to be and already probably being superseded by climate change. But
Hmm.
so they have I think 6 boats that go up and down the Great Barrier Reef, culling swarms of crown of thorns starfish. How do you prioritize? How do you find which reefs to go looking for those crown of thorns starfish, particularly looking for where is there a high amount of food source for crown of thorns
Yeah.
starfish rather than looking for the crown of thorns itself. So that data that we're collecting for census is going into that program at the marine parks. And I think it's getting better and better and better and more useful. But we're also now using it. So as I said before, I think it's like trying to design essentially a targeting system to go,
Hmm.
right. If you're going to intervene in some way, could be better stewardship, could be restoration, could be anything in between.
Hmm.
How do you pick your places? And that's what we're
Yeah.
really interested in, is how do you create a far more efficient way of helping a community choose where it's going to put its limited resources to
Hmm.
help conserve and protect reefs in their own backyard. And,
Does
and, I,
that
and I,
does that mean the sorry to interrupt? Does that mean
no, no, yeah.
um the data that you're providing has to be more accurate? Because right now you're at, like you said, you're at a broad scale. You're looking
Yeah.
at boulder, rubble, branching corals, plate corals, which is good to identify. Obviously.
Yeah.
Um, does that mean, like, to get those types of spaces? Does that mean in certain areas you're going to spend more time and to be a little bit more accurate to identify to genus or species in some of these, if that's even possible?
Not at the moment though. I know that we're working on sort of quite a hard challenge of trying to start to identify soft coral as well. It's much harder
Ah,
to
interesting.
identify using AI, etc., and even human eye. It's much harder.
Right,
So we're
right.
sort of working on that moment with like different color treatments and different sort of approaches. But um, the the first iteration of this was let's find these key source reefs and start to use that to help with reef connectivity mapping and all this kind of stuff. That's Pete's work. Um, but I was just talking about this example of the Mars reef stars. So this is basically rebuilding architecture on reefs that have been hammered by cyclones or very severe bleaching. And that what they're looking for is rubble fields next to good coral. Good,
Mm,
right? So you need both good rubble field, good hard corals, because that's where your fragment's going to come from
yep,
to help rebuild that. So using the data to start to be more specific and go, okay, well, can we find rubble fields in this information? And then can we map that against the good coral? So that you start to see how, so it's still quite early versions of this. But what you're starting to do is build up much better pictures of what's going on in a much, much bigger area.
yeah,
And also, if you think about somewhere like Great Barrier Reef, you could have restoration programs, but they normally need a lot of logistics and resources. How do you change that and think about how can you do that at a much, much lower cost
yep,
and at a very and all being done by locals. No one's
yep,
flying in, no one, so
right.
thinking about how you build a system that can do that and share those insights from like top scientists like Pete with a community in the Philippines that normally wouldn't get access to those insights, but also vice versa, sharing what they're learning on their reefs that they fish on and that are essential to their livelihoods back to the central piece of this and going, okay, well, let's share that with some people in the Caribbean or on the Great Barrier Reef or on
Yeah,
Ningaloo or wherever. So yeah, it's as I said, it's kind of thinking about everything almost much more like a shared economy.
yep,
Like
yep.
everyone's in, everyone has a part to play, whether you're a world's top reef scientist or, looking after a reef in a remote fishing village in the Philippines. You're all important.
Absolutely, and that's the great part of it. You feel so good for like maybe 5 minutes of work a day if you really think about it,
It's
as an
super easy,
analysis,
right?
right? Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
it's insane to know and to understand how impactful it is for from a project point of view. Like the amount of
Mm.
data that you're producing to go into a lab like Peter Mumby's lab and to be able to output the resource that it's outputting, this is a huge game changer in terms of managing the Great Barrier Reef. Like I'm not saying it's going to, improve the Great Barrier Reef like that, but it's going to allow, like you said, to identify points that may need a little bit more help or maybe more analysis to say, how can we help these areas? Like, are these the most vulnerable areas? Are they not? Like, there's so many applications to this, and it seems like you're just getting started in this type of work.
And I mean, really, really good points. I think the thing as well is like we've had, it's been everyone will know this, it's been a really tough start to the year with USAID being pulled and all this kind of stuff. And so instead of there being more funds and resources for conservation, there's definitely like billions of dollars less, basically what feels like is
A
going on
hundred
at the
percent.
moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just sort of, I think we all feel like we can't just, we've got to come up with a way of being able to bypass that problem. We,
Yeah.
and not just because we all love reefs and we care about what happens to them, but there are ways of doing it. And
Hmm.
um, and I think that's kind of what we're sort of weirdly, we didn't design this knowing obviously that this was going to happen, the USAID stuff and this massive drop in
Of course.
income.
Yeah.
But I think it's I had a boss once who said that luck was opportunity meets preparation. And in a weird sort of way, I feel like we've kind of done that by accident.
Yeah.
But it is a system that we've tried to build that can be scaled to anywhere in the world.
Hmm.
And and we know that our tropical reefs, there's a billion people rely on them for their livelihoods. 25% of the
100%.
world's marine species will spend some time on tropical reefs. There's all these kind of massive statistics that go, shit, we really need to look after these places.
Yeah.
And so how are we going to do that without, in this new paradigm that we live in? We've got to think differently.
Agreed. I completely agree. We were talking a little bit about, before we started recording, we talked about how to solve the world for conservation,
Yeah,
in terms of
we did.
conservation funding. We did,
We
by the
fixed
way.
it, so
We fixed
all
it.
done.
It's all good. We'll do that for another episode.
Yeah,
We'll let you know
right.
about it. But it's true. I mean, like there's definitely, we can't rely on necessarily on certain governments. We've learned that from this year. Even our own government sometimes, will switch their priorities. Conservation has to be monetized in a certain way. How that's going to happen, there's a lot of different models out there that may or may not work. It's going to be tested. But I think, as you mentioned too, before we recorded, it's very difficult because you have to dedicate like 60 to 70% of your time to fundraise, to come up with some sort of way to be able to get this going and get this moving so that you can do the work that you really want to do, which could be quite impactful. Just need a bit of funding to go through and pay the people that deserve to be paid and monetize it in certain ways that it's just being funded. And I think it's so funny because like you look at certain people in the world who are billionaires, and then you have others who are they're making money after money after money on frivolous things. And then you look at what we're trying to do here in the nonprofit world, the conservation world, to say we just want to bring this back, or we just want to protect what we have, and we're not looking to make millions and millions of dollars. We're just trying to protect. Like our mission is to protect. If we can do that with the right amount of money, here's what it requires. You can do a lot of great things, and I think it's really, we're going to have to see a change in the funding models, in the monetization models of this type of work, so that we can be more impactful and not rely on the billionaires and the big foundations as much as we did, because there are more people trying to get into this game and trying to do some great work, but it's harder to get funding. So that's always a challenge.
It's definitely tough.
And with that said, there is a donate button on the website. So we're going to link to that. So if people want to donate, they get inspired by this podcast and what you're saying, and the fact that you can actually do quite a bit, please go and donate. We'll put that in the show notes. So, feel free to do that. But, Andy, this has been great. I know you and I could probably talk for hours and hours on end, but I'd love to invite you back on to talk more about the projects, at Citizens of the Reef, and to be able to, this was kind of it was kind of fun because it was like not only getting to know you, but a bit of a workshopping type of episode. And I think people got to listen in on this, which I think is a really, really fun episode to do. But I'd love to invite you back on, or even other staff on, to talk about the work that you guys are doing, and how helpful it is, and all the improvements that you're able to make and to these systems and to the reef. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for getting us on. And it's cool podcast. So good on you for doing it, Andrew. Yeah, thanks, man. I'd love to come back on, or we'll get someone more interesting from a team to come on. But it'll be it's been a pleasure.
You bet.
Did you notice I give extremely long answers to all your questions? Sorry about that.
This is what a podcast is for. I mean, I talk a lot. That's why I started the podcast. I'm in my office by myself talking to you, which is great. All right. Perfect. Well, thanks a lot, Andy. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, same. Thanks, mate.
Thank you, Andy, for joining us on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. It was great to have you on, and I mean that. I often get inspired by the guests that I have on, hence why I have them on. This was one of those episodes. I get completely inspired in the impact that this has been able to have. Andy talks about how the data goes to Pete Mumby's lab at University of Queensland, and it goes into their spatial ecology lab. They run models. It's continuing to increase in the percentage. I think it's 50%, he said during the interview, of how much it contributes to the models that they run, looking at the broad scale shape and size of the reef and what's healthy, what's not. It's just really cool to see. I think it's phenomenal, and I want to see more of this. And I'm so happy that I got to speak to Andy today and to be able to say, hey, you know what? Like, this is an impactful reef. And what I love about this is I have this podcast, I have this platform, and Andy's team reached out. Actually, Andy reached out and was like, hey, I'd love to be on your podcast, or his communications person. And I'm just like, yeah, this is awesome. Like, let's do this. I never would have known. This is the thing that I love about this area of podcasting and social media, is that as I put out more episodes, people hear it. And Andy said he's been listening to us for a while. People hear it. He's like, yeah, I want to share my story. They contact me, we connect, and we share the story. And that's what and then you get to listen to it, and it gets to go out worldwide. And I just love it. Great. reefcensus.org. Greatreefcensus.org is the website. I want you to go visit it. I want you to be one of the, right now, 12,000 people. He wants to get 60,000 people to be able to pick reefs and be able to categorize it. It's a great way to train yourself into understanding reefs for all you early career scientists that want to work on reefs. It's a great way to contribute to conservation for all those people who want to contribute to conservation. And it's going to be a lot of fun to go through it and to see this evolution of this program and how where it's going to go. He's talking about going to other reefs around the world. It's all needed. We need the help. We need the people. We need you as citizen scientists, and you can become a citizen scientist for free. Isn't that wonderful? For free. So let's get on that. I'd love to hear your experience. So hit me up on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. If you've signed up or you've been signed up for a long time, let me know. But also let me know in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube. Just let me know what you think of this program, if you've signed up or you've been a part of it. Love to hear your thoughts on this. Thank you so much to Andy for joining us. Thank you for his team for the work that he does and the work he and his team do. And we want to thank you for listening to this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, from the True North Strong and Free, and soon to be citizen scientist looking at reefs on a fairly daily basis. I can't wait to do that. But thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.